A man's greatest gamble isn't in the boardroom. It's the one he makes on his wife's silence. For Ethan Blackwood, tonight was the ultimate bet. He was walking into the most important gala of his career, held at the opulent Grand Serafina Hotel, with his beautiful young mistress Sophia on his arm. His wife Eleanor was at home, a forgotten piece of a life he was eager to upgrade. He believed he was the king of his own world, the master of his destiny. But what happens when the castle you're showing off doesn't belong to you? What happens when your quiet, unassuming wife holds the keys to the entire kingdom? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story of infidelity. It's a tale of a spectacular downfall, where the truth arrives in a designer gown and changes everything in a single heartbeat. The Blackwood residence in the manicured suburbs of Chestnut Hill was a monument to modern ambition. It was a house of clean lines, cold marble, and vast panes of glass that looked out onto a perfectly landscaped yet sterile garden. It was Ethan's pride and joy, a tangible symbol of his ascent. He was Ethan Blackwood, Senior Vice President at Innovate Dynamics, a man who by all outward appearances had meticulously crafted a perfect life. Tonight, the silence in the cavernous dining room was heavier than usual. Ethan adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo, the fabric a whisper of expensive silk. Across the polished mahogany table, his wife Eleanor Vance picked at her salad. She was beautiful in a way he had stopped noticing, like a piece of classical art that becomes mere wallpaper over time. Her grace was quiet, her intelligence subtle. In the early years of their marriage, he had found that quietness alluring, a calm harbor for his raging ambition. Now he just found it dull. "You're sure you don't want to come?" He asked the question, a mere formality, a box to be ticked on the checklist of feigning concern. "It's the Vanguard Awards. It's a big night for the company." Eleanor looked up, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, holding a flicker of something he couldn't decipher. Sadness. Resignation. "I told you, Ethan. I have that deadline for the library proposal." Besides, she added, a small, sad smile touching her lips, "these events aren't really for me. You shine so brightly, I'd just be in your shadow." He pretended internally at her words, taking them as the compliment they were intended to be. It was true. He did shine. He was dynamic, charismatic, a shark in a world of minnows. Eleanor, with her love for old books, architectural sketches, and quiet evenings, was an anchor. A lovely, respectable anchor, but an anchor nonetheless. "All right, darling. Just don't work too hard," he said, his tone dismissive. He stood up, grabbing the keys to his Jaguar from the crystal bowl by the door. "I'll probably be late. Lots of networking to do. Harrison is expecting me to close the deal with the Japanese investors tonight." "Of course," she said softly, her gaze dropping back to her plate. "Be brilliant." He didn't see the way her hand trembled slightly as she placed her fork down. He didn't notice that her plate was still full. He was already gone, his mind miles away, buzzing with anticipation. He wasn't just thinking about the investors or the award he was certain he would win. He was thinking of Sophia. Sophia Jensen. She was 26, a firecracker in the marketing department at Innovate Dynamics. She was all vibrant energy, ambitious hunger, and wide-eyed admiration for him. She saw him not as the man who sometimes forgot to take out the recycling, but as the titan of industry he saw himself as. She made him feel like the man he was supposed to be, not the man who had married the quiet, unassuming daughter of a moderately successful architect. He had told Sophia his marriage was a hollow shell, a prison of polite obligation. He painted Eleanor as a passionless, unsupportive woman who was content to live off his success without contributing anything to his drive, and Sophia, enamored and ambitious herself, believed every word. As he drove away from the silent, glass-walled house, his phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "Can't wait to see you, superstar. I'm wearing a red dress, the one you love." A genuine smile, the first of the evening, spread across Ethan's face. He pressed the accelerator, leaving his old life behind in the rearview mirror, speeding toward the glittering promise of the new. He felt no guilt. He felt only the exhilarating, intoxicating thrill of having it all. He was Ethan Blackwood, and tonight the world was his to conquer. He had a brilliant career, a beautiful mistress, and a stable, quiet wife at home. It was in his mind, the perfect arrangement, a testament to his own cleverness. He had no idea that the foundation of his perfect world was built on sand, and the tide was about to come in. Sophia Jensen was waiting for him in the lobby of the Langham, a boutique hotel downtown where they always met. When she stood up, the red dress was everything he had imagined. It was a slash of crimson against the muted tones of the lobby, a bold statement of intent. It clung to her curves, a siren's call that made heads turn. Her blonde hair was styled in glamorous waves, and her smile was dazzling. She looked like she belonged in the spotlight. "Wow," Ethan breathed, his appreciation genuine. "You look like a movie star." "I wanted to look perfect for your big night," she said, her voice a seductive purr. She looped her arm through his. "Are you ready to blow them all away? With you on my arm. They won't know what hit them." He boasted, his ego swelling. This was the part of the fantasy he loved most. With Sophia, he was reborn. He wasn't just a husband playing a role. He was a powerful, desirable man, taking what he wanted. He had spun a meticulous web of lies to keep his two worlds separate. To Sophia, Eleanor was a cold, distant figure who hadn't shared his bed in years. He'd told her they were staying together for appearances until a large trust fund, supposedly in Eleanor's name, matured. He'd even hinted that a divorce was on the horizon, a future where he and Sophia could be together, openly and triumphantly. "I still can't believe we're doing this," Sophia whispered as they settled into the back of the limousine he'd hired for the night. "Walking into a company gala together. Isn't it risky?" "The biggest risks have the biggest rewards," he said smoothly, quoting a line he'd used in a board meeting last week. "Tonight is about power. It's about showing them who I am. And you," he said, tilting her chin up, "are part of that. You're not some secret Sophia. You're my future." Her eyes shone with a mixture of adoration and ambition. She saw her own star, rising hitched to his wagon. She was no fool. She knew dating a senior VP was a shortcut up the corporate ladder, but she'd convinced herself it was more than that. It was love. Ethan had a way of making you believe his reality. The limousine pulled up to the curb outside the Grand Serafina Hotel. It was a landmark of old-world luxury, its stone facade illuminated by golden floodlights. Liveried doormen rushed to open their doors. The air buzzed with the energy of the city's elite. Photographers' flashes popped on the red carpet, capturing the arrival of tech moguls, city council members, and financial titans. "This is incredible." Sophia breathed, her hand tightening on his arm. "I've only ever seen this place in magazines." "Get used to it," Ethan said, his voice brimming with confidence. "This is our world now." He guided her onto the red carpet, a proprietary hand on the small of her back. He posed for a few photos, enjoying the attention. He introduced Sophia to a few junior colleagues, deliberately avoiding senior management for now. He introduced her simply as Sophia, letting the implication hang in the air. He wanted whispers. He wanted speculation. It was all part of the power play. Tonight was his coronation, and he wanted everyone to see the queen he had chosen. Inside the ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal and gold. A string quartet played softly on a dais, chandeliers the size of small cars, dripped diamonds of light, and waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the throng with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everyone who was anyone in the city's tech and finance scene was there. Ethan grabbed 2 glasses of champagne. To us, he toasted, clinking his glass against hers. And to a future without shadows. Sophia smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I'll drink that." As they mingled, Ethan felt a supreme sense of control. He was the master puppeteer, and everyone was dancing to his tune. He saw his boss, CEO David Harrison, across the room holding court. He'd go and pay his respects later, once he'd made a sufficient splash. He saw his main rival for the upcoming COO position, Mark Croft, glaring at him from across the room. Mark's date was his wife of 20 years, a pleasant but plain-looking woman. Ethan smirked. Mark played by the old rules. Ethan Blackwood was writing new ones. He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned. It was a mid-level manager from another department. "Ethan." "Good to see you," the man said, his eyes flicking curiously to Sophia. "Big night for you. I hear the Vanguard Award is a lock." "We'll see, Mark. Just happy to be here, celebrating the company's success," Ethan replied with practiced humility. He was on top of the world. Everything was going exactly to plan. He had the perfect job, the perfect mistress, and the perfect cover story. His wife was at home sketching her boring building designs, completely oblivious. In his meticulously constructed world, there were no variables he hadn't accounted for, no risks he hadn't mitigated. He was invincible. For the next hour, Ethan was in his element. He moved through the gilded ballroom like a shark navigating familiar waters. Sophia, a beautiful crimson remora, at his side. He introduced her with a casual intimacy that was far more damning than any official title. "This is Sophia," he would say, and the knowing glances and raised eyebrows from his colleagues only fueled his arrogance. He was flouting convention, and it felt exhilarating. He made a point of speaking with the Japanese investors he'd mentioned to Eleanor. They were older, more traditional men, and he could see a flicker of surprise in their eyes as he introduced Sophia, his special project manager. But Ethan's pitch was so slick, his numbers so compelling, that their professionalism soon overrode any personal judgment. He walked away from the conversation, confident he had sealed the multi-million-dollar deal. "You were amazing," Sophia whispered, her eyes wide with admiration. "You just commanded that entire conversation." "It's what I do," Ethan said with a shrug, though his chest puffed out. He finally spotted his boss, David Harrison, standing near the grand staircase. Harrison was a stern, no-nonsense CEO who valued results above all else. This was the moment Ethan had been building towards. He took Sophia's hand and strode towards him. David Ethan said, his voice smooth as silk. "Good evening. Wonderful event." Harrison turned his eyes sharp as a hawk's took in the scene, Ethan's confident smirk. Sophia's dazzling dress. Their joined hands. A strange, unreadable expression crossed Harrison's face. It wasn't disapproval, not exactly. It was more like pity. Blackwood Harrison said, his voice flat. He gave Sophia a brief, almost dismissive nod. "Enjoying the evening immensely," We were just celebrating the successful chat with our friends from Tokyo," Ethan said, fishing for a compliment. Good Harrison said, his gaze drifting over Ethan's shoulder towards the grand entrance of the ballroom. "There are a lot of important people here tonight. Make sure you're on your best behavior." The comment was oddly paternalistic, and it pricked Ethan's ego. "Always am, David. Always am." Harrison didn't reply. He just gave another one of those strange, searching looks and turned back to his conversation. Ethan felt a flicker of unease. Harrison's reaction wasn't what he'd expected. He'd anticipated a grudging respect, perhaps a roguish man-to-man acknowledgement of Sophia's beauty. Instead, he got a warning. He shook it off. Harrison was an old-school dinosaur. He probably couldn't comprehend a man of Ethan's caliber living life on his own terms. His rival Mark Croft wasn't so subtle. He approached them near the champagne fountain, his own wife trailing nervously behind him. "Well, well," Blackwood Mark began, a sneer playing on his lips. "You certainly have a knack for aggressive expansion in all areas of the business." He let his eyes linger pointedly on Sophia. Sophia flushed, her grip on Ethan's arm tightening. Ethan's jaw clenched. "Careful, Mark," Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. "You wouldn't want to be made redundant before the big promotion announcement. It would be a shame to lose your pension." Mark's face paled. It was a low blow, but effective. He muttered an excuse and shuffled away, his wife throwing a sympathetic glance back at Sophia. "What a jerk," Sophia seethed. "Don't worry about him. He's a fly." "I'm the windshield," Ethan said, his confidence restored by the small victory. He led her to a small, secluded balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, and the skyline glittered like a carpet of scattered jewels. This was the life he deserved. The power, the prestige, the beautiful woman by his side. Everything was perfect. "It's beautiful out here," Sophia said, leaning against the balustrade. "Ethan, what you said to that man about the future. Were you serious?" "Of course I was," he said, pulling her close. He looked into her hopeful eyes and sold the lie with the practiced ease of a master. "Once this promotion to COO is official, everything changes. I'll have the capital and the security to finally break free. You and me, Sophia, against the world." She melted against him, her doubts erased by the sweet poison of his promises. As he held her, looking back into the glittering ballroom, he felt a surge of triumph. He saw the world not as it was, but as a reflection of his own greatness. Every person in that room was a supporting character in his story, a stepping stone on his path. He was the king, and this was his castle. He was so caught up in the grandeur of the illusion that he failed to recognize the hollowness at its core. He didn't build this castle. He hadn't paid for a single stone. And he had no idea the real owner was about to arrive. The evening was reaching its crescendo. The dinner service had concluded, and David Harrison was now on the main stage, preparing to announce the recipient of the Vanguard Award, the highest honor for leadership and innovation at the company. A palpable buzz filled the room. Ethan stood with Sophia near the front, his posture radiating a confident expectation. He'd already prepared a mental draft of his acceptance speech. And now David Harrison's voice boomed through the speakers. "Before we present our main award, we have a very special acknowledgement to make. This magnificent hotel, the Grand Serafina, has been a partner of our gala for over a decade. Tonight we are incredibly honored to have the owner with us in person. He is a titan of industry, a philanthropist, and a man whose vision has shaped much of this city's skyline, though he often prefers to remain behind the scenes. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in offering a warm welcome to Mr. Alistair Vance. Ethan's ears perked up. Vance. The name was the same as Eleanor's maiden name, but he dismissed it as a coincidence. Vance was a common enough name. Still, he was intrigued. He had always wondered who owned the notoriously private Grand Serafina portfolio. This was a networking opportunity of a lifetime. He subtly adjusted his tie, preparing to make an impression. A hush fell over the crowd as all heads turned towards the grand entrance. The ornate double doors, which had been closed, were slowly pulled open by two uniformed attendants. For a moment, the doorway was empty, building suspense. Then a man stepped through. He was in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and a presence that commanded attention without a single word. He wore a simple, exquisitely tailored charcoal suit that made every other tuxedo in the room look like a cheap rental. His face was etched with the lines of quiet authority and sharp intelligence. This was Alistair Vance. Ethan felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated ambition. He had to meet this man. But then Mr. Vance paused in the doorway and extended his hand back into the shadowed foyer. A moment later, a woman stepped into the light, taking his arm. Time seemed to slow down. The murmur of the crowd, the distant clink of glasses, the soft music from the quartet, it all faded into a dull, roaring sound in Ethan's ears. The woman was Eleanor. It was his wife, but it was a version of her he had never seen before. She was not the quiet, mousy woman in sensible cardigans he had left at home. She was wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered under the chandeliers, cut in a classic, elegant style that screamed bespoke couture. Her hair, usually tied in a simple bun, was styled in a sophisticated chignon, with a few loose tendrils framing her face. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat, not ostentatious, but with the deep, fiery brilliance of real quality. But it wasn't the dress or the diamonds that struck Ethan like a physical blow. It was her expression. The hesitant, apologetic smile was gone. In its place was a look of serene, unshakable confidence. She held her head high, her posture perfect. She wasn't in anyone's shadow. She was the source of the light, and she was on the arm of Alistair Vance, her father. The pieces of the puzzle pieces Ethan had been too arrogant to even notice slammed into place with brutal, sickening force. Eleanor's moderately successful architect father, her quiet trips to visit her dad, the way she never, ever worried about money, even when he'd been a junior analyst, her maiden name. Vance. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt the blood drain from his face. Beside him, Sophia stiffened. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice laced with confusion. "Who is that? She looks like—" Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was a desert. The crowd, which had been silent in awe, began to whisper. The whispers grew into a wave of murmurs, spreading through the ballroom like fire through dry grass. People who knew Ethan, who knew his wife, were turning to stare, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning, delicious scandal. Alistair Vance, with Eleanor on his arm, began to walk slowly into the room. They didn't look at the crowd. They didn't look at the stage. Their eyes were fixed on one person. They were looking directly at Ethan Blackwood. Ethan felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him. He felt Mark Croft's stare, now filled not with envy but with pure, unadulterated schadenfreude. He felt David Harrison's gaze from the stage, that look of pity, finally making a horrifying kind of sense. He looked from the radiant, powerful woman who was his wife to the terrified, confused girl in the red dress beside him. And in that moment, the floor of his borrowed castle didn't just crack. It disintegrated into dust, plunging him into a freefall with no end in sight. The king was naked, and everyone could see. The walk from the entrance to where Ethan stood felt like an eternity. For Ethan, each step Alistair and Eleanor took was a hammer blow against the fragile structure of his life. The whispers in the ballroom were now a low, predatory hum. Sophia had taken a half step away from him, her hand no longer on his arm, a dawning horror in her eyes as she began to connect the dots. Alistair Vance stopped a few feet in front of them. His calm, assessing gaze swept over Ethan, then lingered for a cold, dismissive moment on Sophia and her bright red dress. There was no anger in his eyes, just a profound, chilling disappointment. It was the look of a man observing an insect. Eleanor, however, looked directly at her husband. Her expression was not one of rage or hysteria. It was one of crystalline clarity, as if she were seeing him for the first time, stripped of all the illusions he had so carefully constructed. "Eleanor." Ethan stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. What is this? What are you doing here?" A small, humorless smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I should ask you the same thing, Ethan, though I suppose the answer is rather obvious." Her eyes flicked to Sophia, a glance so sharp and quick it was like a paper cut. Sophia visibly flinched and looked at Ethan, her face pale with confusion and betrayal. "Ethan, who is this?" Before Ethan could formulate a lie, Alistair Vance spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority, cutting through the surrounding whispers and silencing the room. "This," he said, his gaze locking onto Ethan's, "is my daughter, Eleanor Vance Blackwood." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The scandal was no longer a matter of speculation. It was a confirmed 5-act drama, playing out in the center of the ballroom. Your daughter," Sophia whispered, turning to Ethan, her world tilting on its axis. "You told me her father was an architect. You said she had no money." Ethan's mind was a maelstrom of panic. It's complicated." He managed the words, sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "No, it's not complicated at all," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a steely quiet. "It's actually very simple. Let me clarify a few things for you, Mr. Blackwood, because you seem to operate under a series of rather profound misconceptions." He took a step closer. "Misconception number 1. That you are a self-made man." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I founded a venture capital firm 30 years ago. One of my first and most successful seed investments was in a promising little tech startup. You might have heard of it. It's called Innovate Dynamics." The blood in Ethan's veins turned to ice. He looked past Alistair to the stage where David Harrison stood with a grim, funereal expression. Harrison knew. Of course he knew. He knew who signed his checks. "Through my holding company, the Vance Group, I retain a 68% majority stake in this company." Alistair continued, his voice relentless. "David Harrison is an excellent CEO, but he works for me, which means, Ethan, that for the past 12 years, you have also worked for me." A sick, wrenching feeling churned in Ethan's stomach. His promotions, his bonuses, his meteoric rise. Had it all been orchestrated? A gilded cage he had mistaken for a throne. Misconception. Number 2. Alistair went on, his tone becoming even colder. That you are a wealthy man. The house in Chestnut Hill. My wedding gift to my daughter. The Jaguar you drive, a birthday present for my daughter. The stock portfolio that gives you your swagger at the country club. It was transferred from a trust I set up. For my daughter. You are not a wealthy man, Ethan. You are a man who has been living on my daughter's allowance. Each word was a precise, devastating blow. The life he had built, the success he had claimed as his own, was a sham. A carefully curated experience provided by the very family he had scorned. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice clear and strong, devoid of the hesitation he was so used to. I asked my father to help you, Ethan. In the beginning. I believed in you. I believed in your ambition. I thought if I gave you a foundation, you would build something wonderful for us. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a quiet wife, but a formidable woman. I was content to be in the background. I was happy to let you have the spotlight. I thought your happiness would be our happiness. But I was wrong. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an audience. And when my quiet support wasn't enough, you found a new one. Her gaze fell on Sophia again, but this time it held a sliver of pity. He told you I was passionless, didn't he? That our marriage was a prison of obligation, that I was holding him back from his brilliant destiny. Sophia, looking utterly lost, could only nod mutely, tears welling in her eyes. That's his story, Eleanor said. The truth is, my greatest passion was my misplaced faith in him. The only prison was the one he built for himself with his own lies. And the only thing I was holding back, she finished, her voice ringing with newfound power, was the consequences. Alistair Vance delivered the final fatal blow. Your employment at Innovate Dynamics is terminated effective immediately. Your company credit cards have been cancelled. The keys to the house and the car, which are in my daughter's name, will be collected by my security team tomorrow morning. You will be escorted from this building now. He gestured subtly, and 2 large men in dark suits, who had been standing discreetly by the doors, began to move towards them. Ethan stood there, stripped bare, in front of the entire world he had tried so desperately to impress. He was not a king. He was not a shark. He was a fraud. A court jester who had been allowed to wear a paper crown for a little too long, and the true monarch had finally arrived to end the charade. The fallout was instantaneous and brutal. As the 2 security men approached, a path cleared around Ethan as if he were carrying a contagious disease. Former colleagues averted their gazes, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Mark Croft, his rival, wore a look of undisguised, triumphant glee. Sophia was the first to desert the sinking ship. The reality of the situation crashed down on her. She wasn't the chosen partner of a powerful executive, but the disposable mistress of a kept man. The future he had promised her was a fantasy built on someone else's money. Humiliation and anger warred on her face. You lied to me, she hissed at Ethan, her voice trembling with rage. You lied about everything. Without another word, she turned and fled, pushing her way through the gawking crowd, her red dress a beacon of her own public shaming. She disappeared out the doors, leaving Ethan completely and utterly alone. One of the security guards, a large man with an impassive face, reached Ethan. "Sir, you need to come with us." His voice was polite, but unyielding. Ethan's mind was still reeling, unable to process the speed and totality of his own destruction. He looked desperately at Eleanor, a primal instinct to plead for taking over. "Ellie, please," he begged, using the pet name from their early happier days. "We can talk about this. This is a mistake." Eleanor looked at him, and her face was a mask of calm. The woman he thought he knew, the woman who would have cried and forgiven him in the past, was gone forever. "No, Ethan," she said, her voice steady. "The mistake was my 16-year investment in you. The return has been disappointing. There is nothing left to talk about." Her finality was more devastating than any shouted insult. It was the sound of a door being closed, locked and barricaded. As the guards gently but firmly took his arms, he saw his boss, David Harrison, approaching Alistair and Eleanor. Harrison bowed his head slightly to Alistair. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry you had to witness this." "It's not your fault," David Alistair replied calmly. "The trash has simply taken itself out." The insult delivered so casually was the final twist of the knife. Ethan was no longer a person to them. He was a piece of refuse to be disposed of. The walk out of the ballroom was the longest and most shameful journey of his life. Every eye was on him. He could hear the frantic whispering, the stifled laughter. He was the evening's entertainment, a cautionary tale that would be told for years to come. The man who flew too close to the sun, only to find out the sun was owned by his wife's father. They didn't take him out the grand entrance. They led him through a side door down a service corridor that smelled of disinfectant and boiled vegetables, and out into a cold, dark alley. The contrast with the opulence of the ballroom was dizzying. One moment he was sipping vintage champagne, the next he was standing next to a dumpster. "A taxi has been called for you, sir." One of the guards said, his duty done. Then they turned and went back inside the service door, clicking shut behind them, leaving him alone in the alley. He stood there in his $1,000 tuxedo, his whole body trembling with a mixture of shock, rage, and a profound, terrifying emptiness. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting a message from Sophia, either angry or desperate. But it was a series of automated emails. "Innovate Dynamics corporate account access revoked. American Express Platinum business card deactivated. Building security key, fob access to Chestnut Hill residence rescinded." The efficiency of his erasure was breathtaking. Alistair Vance hadn't just fired him. He had unplugged him from the life he had known. A yellow cab pulled up to the end of the alley. Ethan got in the worn fabric of the seat, a stark contrast to the plush leather of the limo he'd arrived in. "Where to?" Buddy the driver asked, not even glancing back. And for the first time, Ethan Blackwood had no answer. He had no home to go to. He had no job to wake up for. The woman he claimed to love had abandoned him, and the woman he had abandoned had just demolished him. He stared out the window at the glittering city lights, the same lights that had looked like his kingdom just an hour ago. Now they just seemed to mock him, cold and distant stars, in a universe that no longer cared that he existed. The unraveling was complete. He was nothing. 6 months later, the spring sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a corner office on the 54th floor of the Vance Group headquarters. The view was panoramic, a god's-eye perspective of the city skyline that Alistair Vance had helped to shape. But Alistair wasn't in the main chair today. He was sitting in one of the visitors' chairs, watching his daughter. Eleanor Vance stood before a large drafting table. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she made a minute adjustment to a complex architectural blueprint with a stylus. Gone were the quiet cardigans and the air of hesitant apology. She wore a sharply tailored navy blue pantsuit, her hair cut in a chic professional bob, She radiated an energy that was both calm and commanding. The blueprints on the table were for the Vance Center for the Arts, a new philanthropic project that was her brainchild. She was not just the benefactor. She was the lead architect, a role she had earned with a portfolio of brilliant anonymous design competition entries she'd worked on during the lonely nights of her marriage. "The load-bearing calculations for the central atrium are still not quite right," she murmured, more to herself than to her father. "I want the glass ceiling to feel like it's floating, but the engineering has to be flawless." Alistair smiled a genuine, proud smile. "If anyone can make it float, Eleanor, it's you." She looked up and returned his smile. The sadness that had lingered in her eyes for years was gone, replaced by the clear light of purpose. The scandal of the Vanguard Awards Gala had been the talk of the town for weeks, but Eleanor had weathered it with a grace that silenced all gossip. She hadn't reveled in Ethan's downfall. She had simply moved forward, stepping into the power that had always been hers, but which she had been afraid to claim. Her divorce from Ethan had been swift and brutally simple. With a prenuptial agreement as ironclad as one of Alistair's contracts and the blatant public infidelity, Ethan had no leverage. He walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and a mountain of debt from the lavish lifestyle he could no longer afford. The doorbell to the office chimed, and Alistair's assistant, a kind woman named Maria, poked her head in. "Miss Vance, your 11 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Maria. Send him in." A young, nervous-looking man in a slightly too large suit walked in, clutching a portfolio. He was one of the finalists for the junior architect position on her team. Eleanor greeted him warmly, her confidence putting him immediately at ease. She was no longer just a Vance by name. She was a leader, a mentor. As she began the interview, Alistair quietly slipped out of the office, leaving her to her new life, the one she was building on her own foundation. Meanwhile, across town in a cramped cubicle at a third-rate insurance firm, a man named Ethan was on the phone trying to sell a life insurance policy to an uninterested retiree. His voice had lost its charismatic boom. It was now tinged with the weary desperation of a man who had seen the top and was now living at the bottom. He had tried to find another high-powered job, but the story of his spectacular humiliation had followed him. No one in the city's elite circles would touch him. He was a pariah, a living punchline. He now lived in a small, dingy apartment, his fine suits replaced by off-the-rack polyester. Sometimes, late at night, he would scroll through financial news websites, a masochistic ritual of seeing the world he had lost. Today, an article caught his eye. It was from the city's architectural journal. The headline read, "Eleanor Vance unveils visionary design for new arts center." There was a picture of her standing in front of a stunning model of her building, looking powerful, happy, and radiant. She was everything he had once falsely claimed to be. He stared at the photo for a long time, a hollow ache in his chest. He finally understood. He had thought her silence was weakness, her support a given. He had seen her as a part of his story's background. He realized now that he had never even been the main character in his own life. He was just a temporary resident in hers, a flawed early draft in a story that was always truly about Eleanor Vance. He closed the browser, the bright image of her success burning behind his eyes, and picked up the phone to make another cold call. The line at the other end just rang and rang. The life of Ethan Blackwood had shrunk to the size of a single, sparsely furnished room in a run-down apartment complex in a forgotten part of the city. The panoramic views of Chestnut Hill were replaced by a grimy window that overlooked a brick wall, The scent of Eleanor's fresh orchids was a ghost chased away by the lingering smell of stale coffee and desperation. His world was no longer measured in stock market gains and successful acquisitions, but in the number of rejections he faced per day. He had lost the tailored suits, the Jaguar, the respect. But the hardest thing he lost was the reflection of the man he thought he was. Without the external validation, the praise, the envy of others, he was forced to look at himself, and he did not like what he saw. He saw a hollow man, a parasite, who had mistaken the host's lifeblood for his own. His days at the insurance firm were a monotonous purgatory. He read from a script, his once commanding voice, now a dull drone trying to convince strangers to prepare for a future he himself had utterly failed to secure. He was surrounded by people he once would have considered beneath his notice, people who were now his peers. They were not unkind, but they kept their distance. The story of his downfall was an urban legend in the city's business circles, and even at this low rung of the corporate ladder, the whispers had followed him. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, during his lunch break, he was huddled under the awning of a coffee shop, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. He was watching the rain sluice down the dirty pavement when he saw her. It was Sophia Jensen. She was walking briskly, sharing an umbrella with another woman, both of them laughing at something on a phone. The vibrant red dress was gone, replaced by a sensible, stylish trench coat and practical boots. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked different. She looked real. The ambition and adoration that had once been plastered on her face were gone, replaced by a calm, self-possessed confidence. For a moment, Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. A wild, foolish hope flared within him. She was the only other person who had been in the center of the storm with him. Maybe she would understand. Maybe they could. He took a step forward out from under the awning and called her name. Sophia. She stopped and turned. Her laughter died as she saw him. Her friend looked from Ethan's haggard face and ill-fitting coat to Sophia, her expression questioning. For a few seconds, Sophia's face was a blank canvas. Then recognition dawned, followed by something he hadn't expected. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was a cool, dispassionate pity, the kind one might feel for a stray dog. "Ethan," she said, her voice even. There was no trace of the breathless admiration he was used to. I just wanted to see how you were," he stammered, feeling foolish under her steady gaze. "I'm fine," she said. It wasn't a platitude, it was a simple statement of fact. I transferred out of the main branch. "I'm in the San Francisco office now. It's a better fit." "Oh," he said, the single word sounding inadequate. "Good. That's good for you." She gave a small, tight smile. "It is. I learned a valuable lesson that night. Never hitch your wagon to a shooting star, especially when you don't know who owns the sky." The metaphor was sharp, and it hit its mark. I'm building my own career now, on my own merits. It's slower, but it's real. Her friend tugged gently on her arm. "Sophia, we're going to be late." "Right." She looked at Ethan one last time. "Goodbye, Ethan. I hope you figure things out." And with that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She didn't look back. Ethan stood in the rain, the coffee in his hand, now cold, watching her go. He had expected a scene, a confrontation, perhaps even a sliver of shared victimhood. Instead, He got closure, her closure, not his. She had processed the humiliation, learned from it, and moved on. Her life was continuing its upward trajectory, albeit on a different path. He had simply stopped frozen on the night of the gala. He had told her she was his future, but he had only ever been a detour for her, a costly mistake she had already corrected. He was a chapter in her book, a chapter she had already finished reading. He, on the other hand, was stuck on the same page, reading the story of his own failure over and over again, an echo in an empty room. That evening he went back to his apartment, ignored the stack of final notice bills on his counter, and for the first time since that night, he wept. They were not tears of self-pity, but tears of a terrifying, profound loneliness. He had finally been seen for what he was, and the world had collectively decided to look away. Eleanor Vance stood on the wind-swept raw earth of the construction site, a hard hat perched on her head. Around her, the skeleton of the Vance Center for the Arts was beginning to rise, a testament of steel and concrete to a future she was actively creating. The chaos of construction, the roar of machinery, the shouts of workers, the clang of metal on metal, was music to her. It was the sound of progress, the sound of something new being born from nothing. Her life was now a carefully balanced structure of her own design. Her days were filled with meetings, site visits, and long productive hours at the drafting table. She had found her voice not just in boardrooms, but in the elegant, functional lines of her designs. She was no longer Eleanor Vance Blackwood, the quiet wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the architect. Her work had attracted attention. Samuel Reed, a notoriously sharp architectural critic for the New York Standard, had initially written a skeptical piece about the project, dismissing it as a potential vanity project for a billionaire's daughter. Instead of issuing a press release, Eleanor had invited him to her office. For 2 hours, she walked him through every blueprint, every 3D model, explaining her philosophy. The interplay of light and space, the commitment to sustainable materials. Samuel, a man known for his acerbic wit, had been silenced by her passion and undeniable talent. He left her office looking thoughtful, and his follow-up article was a glowing retraction. It praised her visionary synthesis of classical form and modern functionality. He became an unlikely ally, and over time, a friend. They would have lunch once a month, their conversations filled with spirited debates about architecture, art, and the city they both loved. He saw her not for her name or her past, but for the brilliance of her mind. It was a partnership of equals, something she had never truly experienced before. One evening, as she was packing her briefcase to go home, her assistant handed her a small stack of mail. Tucked between industry magazines and invitations to charity events was a plain white envelope. There was no return address, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Ethan's. Her first instinct was to throw it away unopened. What could he possibly have to say that would matter now? But a different, calmer part of her, the part that had designed atriums and calculated load-bearing weights, was curious. Not with emotion, but with an engineer's desire to understand a completed failed structure. She sat down at her desk, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside her window, and opened it. The letter was 2 pages long, written on cheap-lined paper. It was not the confident, arrogant scrawl of the man she had married, but the shaky, desperate script of a broken man. He wrote of his loneliness, of the crushing weight of his new reality. He apologized not with the smooth, manipulative charm of his past, but with a raw, ugly honesty. He admitted he had never truly seen her. that he had been blinded by his own reflection in the mirror of success she and her father had provided. He didn't ask for forgiveness, nor did he ask for a second chance. He asked for one thing. "I just need to know the last line," read, "Was any of it real to you? Did you ever love the man you thought I was?" Eleanor read the letter twice. A year ago, these words would have torn her apart, validating her pain, but also reopening old wounds. Now she felt a profound sense of distance. She was reading about two people she no longer knew, the arrogant man he had been, and the quiet, hopeful woman who had loved him. Both were ghosts. She thought about his question. Did she love him? Yes, she had. Desperately. But she had been in love with a blueprint, a design for a man she thought she could help build. The final structure had been a catastrophic failure, unable to bear the weight of its own ego. She folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. She felt no anger, no sadness. She felt only a quiet finality. He was a part of her history, a lesson in foundations, but he was not a part of her future. Eleanor stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the construction site. The steel beams, illuminated by powerful floodlights, reached for the night sky like a promise. That was her reality now. Solid, tangible, and rising. She did not need to answer Ethan's letter. Her answer was not in words, but in the steel and glass taking shape below. It was in her signature on the blueprints, the only signature that mattered anymore. Her own. And so Ethan Blackwood's world, built on a foundation of lies, and someone else's fortune, came crashing down in the most public way imaginable. It's a stark reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds its way to the surface. Eleanor Vance's story isn't one of revenge, but of rediscovery. She reclaimed the power she had willingly given away, not to destroy her husband, but to finally build her own life. She proves that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the solid foundation you build for yourself. What did you think of Ethan's karmic downfall? Was Eleanor's unveiling perfectly played? We all know someone who has underestimated a quiet, powerful person, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of karmic justice and female empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own inner strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that uncover the truth and celebrate the triumph of the human spirit. Thank you for listening. What if the person you trusted most, the one holding your hand while you brought new life into the world, uttered words that shattered your reality? For one woman, in the raw, agonizing moments of childbirth, her husband's casual dismissal, "She's just being emotional," became a chilling premonition. He thought he was calming a hysterical wife. He had no idea he was speaking to a titan of industry in the making. The very next day, while he was picking out a "World's Best Dad" mug, her face was on the cover of Forbes. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a single, callous comment ignited a revolution in one woman's life and exposed the staggering secrets hidden within her marriage. The birthing suite at St. Jude's Medical Center was a study in beige indifference. The walls, the color of weak tea, seemed to absorb the frantic energy that pulsed within them. For Isabella Martinez, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic peaks and valleys of her contractions, each one a wave threatening to pull her under. Her husband, David Chen, sat perched on the edge of a visitor's chair, his tailored suit a stark contrast to her sweat-dampened hospital gown. He looked less like a supportive partner and more like a man waiting for a delayed flight. Can you just breathe with me?" Isabella gasped, her knuckles white as she gripped the bed rail. "Like we practiced?" David looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing his handsome features. "I am, honey. I'm right here." He took a perfunctory deep breath, the sound barely audible over the beeping of the fetal heart monitor. "No, you're not," she ground out, another contraction seizing her. "You're checking your emails. I can see the blue light on your face." "It's an important deal, Izzy," he said, his voice laced with a familiar note of condescension. "The market in Singapore is opening and I need to be on top of it. You know how crucial this quarter is for my promotion." Isabella squeezed her eyes shut, a tear of frustration and pain leaking from the corner. It wasn't just the physical agony of labor, it was the gnawing loneliness of it. For months, she had felt like a supporting character in the grand narrative of David's career. His late nights at the office, his networking dinners, his constant talk of targets and projections. It had all created a chasm between them. She had hoped the birth of their first child would bridge that gap, would be the one thing that was unequivocally theirs. "David, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I need you. Right now. Just for a little while." He sighed, a long-suffering sound that made her stomach clench tighter than any contraction. He pocketed his phone and moved to her bedside, taking her hand in his. His touch was cool and distant. "Okay, I'm here. See, just try to relax. Just try to. The doctor said it could still be hours." But Isabella couldn't relax. The pain was a living thing clawing at her from the inside. With each surge, a primal scream built in her throat. She tried to hold it back, remembering the calm, serene births she had seen in online videos. But this was not serene. This was brutal. "It hurts so much," she whimpered, her body trembling. "I don't think I can do this." David patted her hand awkwardly. "You're being a little dramatic. Don't you think women have been doing this for centuries? My mother had 3 kids, and she never made this much of a fuss." The words, meant to be placating, landed like a slap. "Dramatic," she whispered, her voice dangerously low. "Well, yeah," he said, oblivious to the storm gathering in her eyes. "You're getting all worked up. It's not good for the baby. The nurse said to stay calm." The nurse, a kind older woman named Brenda, chose that moment to enter the room. She took in the scene. Isabella's tear-streaked face, David's stiff posture, with a practiced eye. "How are we doing, sweetie?" Brenda asked, her voice a warm balm. "He thinks I'm being dramatic," Isabella said, her voice trembling with a mixture of pain and fury. Brenda shot David a look that could curdle milk. "Well, then he's never seen a woman in transition. You're doing amazing, Isabella. Your body is working hard." She then turned to David. "And you, sir, your only job right now is to be her rock. Tell her she's a warrior. Tell her she's the strongest person you know, because right now she is." David had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I'm sorry, Izzy. I don't know what to do." "Just be here," she pleaded. "Just be present." For a while he was. He held her hand, wiped her brow, and murmured encouraging words that sounded like they were lifted from a script. But as the hours dragged on, his attention began to wander again. His phone would reappear in his hand, his gaze drifting to the television in the corner of the room, which was tuned to a 24-hour news channel. The final stage of labor was a blur of excruciating pain and disorienting commands. "Push, Isabella, push," the doctor urged. She bore down with all her might, a guttural cry tearing from her lips. She was exhausted, emotionally flayed, and felt utterly alone. In a moment of reprieve, she looked at David, searching for a lifeline in his eyes. He was looking at her, but his expression was not one of awe or concern. It was pity. And then he said it, the words that would echo in her mind for years to come. He leaned over to the doctor, a conspiratorial whisper that she was clearly meant to overhear. She's always been a bit emotional, tends to overreact. The doctor, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s named Dr. Anya Sharma, didn't even grace him with a response. Her focus was entirely on Isabella. But Isabella heard. The words cut through the haze of pain, sharp and precise. It wasn't just a dismissal of her current agony. It was a judgment on her entire being. Every time she had cried over a sad movie, every time she had been passionate in an argument, every time she had expressed a deep-seated fear or a soaring hope, it was all being filed away under the label of emotional. In that moment, something inside her shifted. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the crucible of her pain. She would show him. She would show them all. With a final ferocious push, she brought her daughter into the world. The baby's cry filled the room, a raw, powerful sound that silenced everything else. They laid the tiny, wriggling creature on her chest, and Isabella was consumed by a love so fierce it stole her breath. She looked at her daughter, so small and yet so full of life, and made a silent promise. She would never let anyone make her feel small again. David, now all smiles, and relieved cheer, leaned in to kiss her. "You did it, Izzy. She's beautiful." Isabella turned her head away. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. He recoiled, his smile faltering. What's wrong?" She looked at him, then her eyes clear and steady. "You'll see," she said. And in that moment, he had no idea just how true those words would be. He was looking at his wife, the mother of his child, but he was also looking at a stranger, a woman he had fundamentally misunderstood, a woman who was about to turn his world upside down. The day after their daughter, whom Isabella unilaterally named Hope, was born, the hospital room was a revolving door of well-wishers. David's parents, the Chens, arrived with an ostentatious balloon bouquet and a barrage of unsolicited advice. Isabella's own mother, a quiet, gentle woman, brought a hand-knitted blanket and a thermos of chicken soup. David was in his element, the proud new father, accepting congratulations and regaling everyone with a sanitized, heroic version of the birth story. He conveniently left out his emotional comment and his preoccupation with the Singaporean market. Isabella played her part, smiling weakly and accepting the coos and compliments directed at Hope. But inside, she felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of her own life. The cold resolve that had taken root in the delivery room had not thawed. If anything, it had solidified into a quiet determination. That afternoon, while Hope slept in her bassinet, and David was down in the cafeteria, charming the nurses, Isabella's best friend, Chloe, arrived. Chloe was a whirlwind of energy and brightly colored scarves, a successful graphic designer who had been Isabella's confidant since college. "Oh, honey, you look like you just pushed a human out of your body," Chloe said, enveloping her in a gentle hug. "But a beautiful, glowing warrior goddess version of that." Isabella managed a genuine smile for the first time that day. "Thanks, Chloe. I needed that." "I brought you the essentials," Chloe said, unpacking a bag filled with gourmet chocolates, a trashy celebrity magazine, and a bottle of expensive champagne. "The champagne is for when you get home, obviously, or for now, I don't judge." Isabella laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse. Maybe later. I'm still a bit wobbly. So, Chloe said, settling into the visitor's chair and lowering her voice. How's Captain Corporate? Did he manage to put his phone down for more than 5 minutes? Isabella's smile faded. Barely. He told the doctor I was being too emotional while I was in the middle of a contraction. Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in fury. He did not. Oh, I will end him. I will use my design skills to create a PowerPoint presentation detailing his every flaw and email it to his entire company. Save your energy, Isabella said, a strange new confidence in her voice. I have a better idea. Before Chloe could ask what she meant, David bustled back into the room, holding a copy of a financial newspaper. You will not believe this, Izzy, he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. The Harrison deal went through. My numbers are going to be through the roof this quarter. That promotion is in the bag. He brandished the paper like a trophy. That's great, honey, Isabella said, her tone flat. He didn't notice. His attention was already on the television, which was tuned to a business news channel. A breaking news banner flashed across the bottom of the screen. Tech world stunned by Aura, mysterious new AI platform that secures $500 million in Series A funding. David scoffed. Another one of these overnight success stories. Probably just some kid in a garage who got lucky. The news anchor continued, her voice filled with professional excitement. The founder of Aura, who has remained anonymous until now, has been revealed, and it's a name no one in Silicon Valley saw coming. On the screen, a photograph appeared. It was a professionally shot headshot, one Isabella had taken a few months ago for a project she had told David was for a freelance design portfolio. She looked powerful, her expression serene but determined. Beneath the photo in bold letters was her name, Isabella Martinez. The camera then panned to a magazine cover. It was the latest issue of Forbes, and there she was again in the same power pose under the headline, The Unseen Force, Isabella Martinez, the woman behind the revolutionary AI Aura and her $1.5 billion valuation. The room fell silent. The only sound was the gentle sucking noise Hope was making in her sleep. Chloe's jaw was on the floor. She slowly turned to Isabella, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning admiration. You are Aura. Isabella simply nodded, a small triumphant smile playing on her lips. David stood frozen, the newspaper slipping from his grasp and fluttering to the floor. He stared at the television screen, then at his wife, then back at the screen. His face, which had been so full of self-congratulation, glee just moments before, was now a mask of utter bewilderment. What is this? He stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the TV. This has to be a mistake. A joke. It's not a joke, David, Isabella said, her voice as calm and clear as a bell. It's my company. Your company. He squeaked, his voice an octave higher than usual. What company? You design websites for dentists. I did, she corrected him gently, in my spare time, for the past 2 years while you were working late and going on business trips. I was building Aura. She went on to explain, her voice steady and sure, how she had identified a gap in the market for a more intuitive, human-centric AI for creative professionals. How she had taught herself to code late at night after David had fallen asleep. How she had secretly assembled a small, brilliant team of female engineers who, like her, had been underestimated and overlooked by the tech industry. How she had bootstrapped the company with her freelance earnings, and then using a male pseudonym, Alex Chen, to avoid the inherent bias of the venture capital world, had pitched her idea to investors. Alex Chen. David repeated, his voice hollow. You used my name. A version of it, she said. I thought it was fitting. The news anchor was now interviewing a tech analyst who was gushing about Aura's potential. This is a game changer, the analyst said. The platform is light years ahead of anything else on the market, and the fact that it was created by a woman of color no less, who has been completely outside the Silicon Valley echo chamber. It's a story for the ages. Isabella Martinez isn't just the future of AI. She's the future of business. David sank into the visitor's chair, his face pale. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her for the first time in years. He wasn't seeing the emotional woman he had so casually dismissed. He was seeing a stranger, a brilliant, powerful, and utterly self-possessed stranger who had built a billion-dollar company from their spare bedroom. And he, the man who was so proud of his potential promotion, suddenly felt very, very small. The chasm between them had not been bridged by the birth of their daughter. It had been revealed for what it was, a vast, gaping canyon, and he was on the wrong side of it. The revelation of Isabella's secret life as a tech mogul sent shockwaves not just through the business world, but through the sterile beige hospital room that had become the unlikely epicenter of their domestic drama. For the next few hours, Isabella's phone, which she had kept on silent, buzzed incessantly. Emails, texts, and social media notifications poured in a digital tsunami of congratulations, interview requests, and investment offers. Chloe, now fully recovered from her shock, had gleefully taken on the role of temporary gatekeeper fielding calls and marveling at the names that flashed across the screen. Mark Cuban's assistant just called, she whispered to Isabella at one point, her eyes like saucers. And I think I just hung up on Sheryl Sandberg. David, in stark contrast, was a study in stunned silence. He had retreated to a corner of the room, his face a pallid mask of confusion and what looked suspiciously like fear. He kept glancing at Isabella, then at the sleeping baby, as if trying to reconcile the two wildly different versions of the woman he thought he knew. The doting new mother in the hospital gown, and the ruthless CEO on the cover of Forbes. How could they be the same person? His own world, which had seemed so solid and impressive just that morning, now felt flimsy and insignificant. His hard-won deal, his imminent promotion. They were like children's toys compared to the era she had built in secret. That evening, after the last of the visitors had departed and a fragile quiet had settled over the room, the tension between them was a palpable thing. Isabella was breastfeeding hope, her expression serene, as she gazed at her daughter. David, unable to bear the silence any longer, finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me, Izzy?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you hide all of this from me?" Isabella looked up, her eyes unreadable. "Would you have believed me?" she asked softly. "Or would you have told me I was being emotional, that I was overreacting?" The words, a direct echo of his own callous dismissal, hit their mark. David flinched as if struck. "That's not fair," he mumbled. "Isn't it?" She countered, her voice still quiet, but with an edge of steel. "For the past 5 years, David, my dreams have been a footnote to yours. My ambitions were something to be managed, to be fitted in around your schedule. When I wanted to take a course in advanced coding, you said we couldn't afford it, that my freelance work was just a hobby. The week after, you bought a new set of golf clubs for your networking with clients." She adjusted the baby in her arms, her movements fluid and confident. I learned very quickly that if I wanted to achieve anything, I had to do it on my own. So I did. David ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time that day. I had no idea you felt that way. I always supported you. You supported the version of me that you were comfortable with, she said, the one who made your favorite dinner, who listened to you complain about your boss, who organized our social life. You didn't want a partner, David. You wanted a support system, an unpaid intern for your life. The raw, unvarnished truth of her words hung in the air between them. David opened his mouth to protest, to defend himself, but no words came. Because deep down he knew she was right. He had taken her for granted, had relegated her to the background of his own ambition. He was about to apologize, to beg for a chance to understand, when a nurse knocked on the door and entered with a small official-looking envelope. "A courier just delivered this for you, Mr. Chen," she said, handing it to him. David took it, a puzzled frown on his face. It wasn't from his office. The return address was a prestigious law firm in the city center. With trembling fingers he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a formal notice, a letter of termination. "What is it?" Isabella asked, noticing the color drain from his face. He read the letter aloud, his voice a strangled croak. "Dear Mr. Chen, this letter is to inform you that your employment with Sterling and Finch is terminated effective immediately. This decision is based on a gross violation of the company's code of conduct, specifically Clause 12.b regarding insider trading and corporate espionage." He looked up at Isabella, his eyes wide with panic. "Insider trading, corporate espionage. This is insane. It's a mistake. Is it?" "David." Isabella's voice was quiet, but it cut through his panic like a surgeon's scalpel. "Of course it is," he insisted, his voice rising in desperation. "I don't even know how—" "Let me jog your memory," she said, her gaze unwavering. "A few months ago, you came home very excited about a new client, a tech startup called Innovatech. You said they were developing a revolutionary new AI platform." David's face went white. "How? How did you know about that?" "Because Innovatech was my primary competitor," Isabella said calmly. "And I have it on very good authority that you accessed their confidential data room using your senior credentials at Sterling and Finch, and then you sold that information to their biggest rival." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. David stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He had been so careful, had used encrypted channels, had covered his tracks meticulously. How could she possibly know? The Harrison deal. She continued, piecing it all together for him. "The deal you were so proud of this morning, the one that was supposed to get you your promotion. It was with the company that bought Innovatech's stolen data, the data you provided." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. His big win was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. And somehow his wife, the woman he thought was designing websites for dentists, knew all about it. "But how?" he whispered, the fight draining out of him. "You're not the only one with connections, David." Isabella said, a hint of a sad smile on her lips. "Aura isn't just a platform for creatives. It's also one of the most sophisticated data analysis tools in the world. It can find patterns and connections that no human could ever see. It took Aura less than a second to trace the data breach at Innovatech back to an IP address. Your IP address, at your office." She had known. For weeks she had known about his betrayal. She had watched him celebrate his success, knowing it was all a sham. She had let him walk right into the trap he had set for himself. The irony was staggering. He had dismissed her as too emotional, while he was the one engaging in criminal activity, driven by a desperate ego-fueled need to get ahead. He had accused her of being dramatic, while his own life was a carefully constructed house of cards about to come crashing down. He looked at his wife, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet, unassuming woman he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable opponent, a queen in a high-stakes chess game he didn't even know he was playing, and he had just been checkmated. He sank to his knees, the letter of termination crumpling in his fist. He had not only lost his job and his reputation, he had lost his wife. And he had no one to blame but himself. The woman he had underestimated had not just surpassed him, she had exposed him. The drama in the delivery room was just the opening act. The real story was just beginning. The days that followed were a surreal blur of jarring contrasts. While Isabella's star ascended at a meteoric rate, David's world imploded with brutal efficiency. The news of his termination for corporate espionage, coupled with the bombshell revelation of his wife's identity, became a salacious B story in the business journals. He was a modern-day Icarus, flying too close to a sun he didn't even know existed. His name, once a mark of rising success at Sterling and Finch, was now whispered in tones of pity and scorn. He checked out of the hospital suite with Isabella and Hope, a ghost of the man who had checked in. The drive home was silent, the air in their luxury sedan thick with unspoken accusations and the quiet hum of $1 billion valuation. Their beautiful minimalist home, once a symbol of their shared success, now felt like her territory. The sleek furniture, the curated art, the panoramic city views, it all seemed to belong to her, to the formidable CEO of Aura, not to the emotional wife he had married. Isabella, meanwhile, was navigating the treacherous waters of her newfound fame with a preternatural calm. She set up a temporary command center in their home office, the same room where she had secretly built her empire. Chloe, who had quit her job with a flourish of triumphant emails, was now her de facto chief of staff, managing a relentless schedule of calls with lawyers, investors, and public relations firms. "The New York Times wants a feature," Chloe would announce, sticking her head into the nursery where Isabella was changing Hope's diaper. "And Anderson Cooper's people are online too. They want you for a primetime special." Isabella would simply nod her focus on the tiny human in front of her. "Tell them my daughter's nap schedule is non-negotiable." This juxtaposition was not lost on David. He would watch from the doorway as she seamlessly transitioned from a tender, cooing mother to a sharp, decisive executive negotiating the terms of a multi-million-dollar partnership with a Japanese tech giant while gently rocking Hope's bassinet with her foot. He saw a strength and a multifaceted brilliance in her that he had been completely blind to. He had seen her only through the narrow lens of his own needs and expectations. His days were a bleak landscape of shame and inactivity. He spent hours aimlessly scrolling through the news on his tablet, each article about Isabella's genius and Aura's disruptive technology, a fresh stab to his wounded pride. His former colleagues, the ones who had clapped him on the back and called him a rainmaker, now crossed the street to avoid him. The networking buddies he had played golf with were suddenly unavailable for a drink. He was a pariah, and the loneliness was crushing. In a desperate attempt to feel useful, he tried to take over the domestic duties. He made coffee, which was too weak. He attempted to cook dinner and nearly set off the smoke alarm. He offered to watch Hope, but his fumbling, uncertain movements only made the baby cry, and Isabella would have to swoop in and expertly soothe her. He was as incompetent at home as he now was in his professional life. One evening, about a week after they had returned from the hospital, David found Isabella in the nursery, softly singing a lullaby to Hope. He stood in the doorway, a silent, pathetic figure. I'm sorry, Izzy. He said the words, feeling woefully inadequate. For everything. For what I said in the hospital, for the other thing. Isabella didn't turn around. Which other thing are you referring to, David? She asked, her voice soft but pointed. The insider trading or the years of casual neglect? He flinched. Both. All of it. I was a fool. I was so wrapped up in my own ambition I couldn't see you. I didn't see you. No, you didn't, she agreed, finally turning to face him. Hope was asleep on her shoulder, her tiny face a picture of pure innocence. You saw what you wanted to see. A pretty, agreeable wife who would make your life comfortable while you pursued your important career. I can change, he pleaded, taking a tentative step into the room. Let me show you. I'll support you. I'll be a stay-at-home dad. I'll be your unpaid intern. Whatever you want. A sad smile touched Isabella's lips. It's not that simple, David. This isn't about you taking on a new role in my life. It's about the fact that the entire foundation of our marriage was a lie. You didn't respect me. And trust, once that's gone, it's almost impossible to get back. Her words were not angry, but they were devastatingly final. He felt a chasm opening up between them, far wider than the one he had perceived before. Just then, Isabella's phone, which she had left on the changing table, began to buzz. Chloe's name flashed on the screen. Isabella sighed and answered it. What is it, Chloe? I'm putting the baby down. Chloe's voice on the other end was frantic. You need to see this. Turn on the news. Any channel. Isabella's brow furrowed in concern. She picked up the baby monitor and walked into the living room, David trailing behind her like a lost puppy. She flicked on the large-screen TV. A news anchor was reporting live, a graphic of a man's face displayed prominently next to her. The man was handsome, with a charismatic smile and piercing blue eyes. The name beneath the picture was Liam O'Connell. Breaking news in the tech world tonight, the anchor said. Liam O'Connell, the disgraced founder of Innovatech, the company at the center of the recent corporate espionage scandal, has just released a statement. O'Connell, who was once Isabella Martinez's mentor, and according to sources, her former fiancé, is claiming that he is the true architect of the Aura platform. He alleges that Martinez stole his intellectual property after their acrimonious breakup 5 years ago. The camera cut to a pre-recorded video of Liam looking earnest and wronged. Aura was my brainchild, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Isabella was my protégé. I trusted her, and she betrayed me. She took my work, my dream, and passed it off as her own. I have the proof. I have the original code, and I will fight to get my company back. David stared at the screen, a new wave of shock washing over him. Former fiancé, mentor. This was a part of Isabella's past he knew absolutely nothing about. He turned to look at his wife. Her face, which had been so composed and in control, was now ashen. Her hand, which held the remote, was trembling slightly. The formidable CEO, the unshakable titan of industry, looked for the first time vulnerable. The man on the screen, Liam O'Connell, was not just a rival. He was a ghost from her past, a ghost David never knew existed, and he had just declared war. The battle for Aura was no longer just about business. It was deeply, dangerously personal. And David, the disgraced husband, was caught in the crossfire, a powerless spectator to a drama that had started long before he had ever entered the picture. The accusation from Liam O'Connell landed like a grenade in the already chaotic landscape of Isabella's new life. The media, which had been celebrating her as a feminist icon and a business visionary, now pivoted with dizzying speed. The narrative shifted from a story of female empowerment to a salacious tale of love betrayal and stolen genius. "Tech's new queen, or a cunning thief," blared one headline. "The battle of the exes who really created aura," screamed another. Liam, a master of public relations, played his part to perfection. He gave tearful interviews, painting himself as the brilliant, trusting mentor whose heart and life's work had been stolen by a manipulative femme fatale. He produced reams of evidence, early-stage code snippets, concept documents, and emails from 5 years prior that, taken out of context, seemed to support his claim. He was charismatic, believable, and he had a story the media couldn't resist. Aura's investors grew nervous. The company's valuation, which had been soaring, began to wobble. The board of directors, who had been singing Isabella's praises, now called for emergency meetings, their voices laced with concern. The fairy tale was over. Now the witch hunt had begun. Inside the minimalist fortress of their home, the atmosphere grew even more strained. Isabella became a woman possessed. She worked around the clock. Her days a frantic blur of legal consultations, board meetings, and strategy sessions with her PR team. She barely ate, and the soft maternal glow she'd had in the days after Hope's birth was replaced by a hard, brittle exhaustion. David watched her, his feelings a tangled mess of guilt, awe, and a strange, newfound protectiveness. He saw the toll Liam's accusations were taking on her, and for the first time, his concern was not for himself, but for her. He remembered the name Liam O'Connell from snippets of conversation early in their relationship. Isabella had mentioned him once or twice, vaguely referring to him as a former boss from her first job in tech. She had never mentioned they were engaged. The omission now felt like a gaping wound, a testament to the secrets they had both kept. One night, David found her in the home office at 3 a.m., surrounded by stacks of legal documents, her face illuminated by the cold light of her laptop screen. Her shoulders were slumped, and for a moment she looked utterly defeated. "You should sleep," he said softly from the doorway. She jumped, startled. "I can't. They're filing an injunction tomorrow. They want to freeze all of Aura's assets." He walked into the room, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he didn't feel like an intruder. He pulled up a chair and sat opposite her. "Talk to me, Izzy," he said. "Tell me about him. Tell me the truth." Isabella stared at him, her eyes searching his for a long moment. Then she let out a long, shuddering breath and began to speak. "Liam was my first real boss," she began, her voice low. "I was young, just out of college, full of ideas. He was brilliant, charismatic, the golden boy of the local tech scene. He took me under his wing. We started working on a project together, an early concept for an intuitive AI. It was collaborative. My ideas, his coding expertise." She paused, a shadow passing over her face. "He was also incredibly charming. He made me feel like I was the center of the universe. We fell in love. We got engaged. I thought he was my future." "What happened?" David asked gently. "The closer we got to a viable product, the more he changed," she said. "He started taking credit for my ideas in meetings. He would present my concepts as his own. When I confronted him, he would laugh it off, tell me I was being sensitive. He'd say, 'We're a team, baby. What's yours is mine.' But it never seemed to work the other way around." The word sensitive hung in the air, a bitter echo of David's own words in the delivery room. He felt a fresh wave of shame. "The final straw," Isabella continued, "was when he pitched our project to a major VC firm. He put his name on the patent application as the sole inventor. My name was nowhere on it. When I found out, I was devastated. I told him it was over. He didn't take it well. He threatened to ruin me to make sure I never worked in the tech industry again. He said he would paint me as an unstable, emotional woman who couldn't handle the pressure. She looked at David, her eyes blazing with a long-suppressed anger. So I disappeared. I left the tech world. I started my own small freelance business, and I met you. I never wanted to look back. I buried that part of my life because I was ashamed. I let him make me feel small. And Aura? David asked. Aura is all mine, she said with fierce pride. It's built on a completely different framework. The core concept of a human-centric AI might be similar, but the architecture, the code, the entire execution is mine. The snippets he's showing the media, they're from our old project. They're a dead end. They're worthless. But he's banking on the fact that no one will dig deep enough to see that. He's not trying to win in a court of law. He's trying to win in the court of public opinion. He wants to destroy my reputation, just like he promised he would. David listened, horrified and enlightened. He finally understood the depth of her past trauma, the reason for her secrecy. It wasn't about deceiving him. It was about protecting herself. And he, with his own casual dismissiveness, had unwittingly become a part of the pattern of men who had underestimated and belittled her. A new resolve hardened within him. He was not a tech genius. He was not a PR expert. He was a disgraced former executive with a tarnished reputation. But he still had a brain, and he knew the world he came from. The cutthroat, ego-driven world of corporate finance, a world not so different from Liam's. He's a bully, is he? David said, his voice firm. And I know how to deal with bullies. They have weaknesses. They're arrogant. They make mistakes. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. You're fighting him on your turf, technology and the law. You need to fight him on his. Public perception, corporate warfare. For the first time since the news broke, Isabella looked at him not as a failed husband, but as a potential ally. What are you suggesting? I still have a few contacts, David said, a glimmer of his old confidence returning. People who owe me favors. People who hate Liam O'Connell more than you do. He burned a lot of bridges on his way up. Let me make some calls. Let me dig. You focus on the legal battle. Let me handle the back channels. Isabella hesitated for a moment. Could she trust? Asked him. Could she rely on the man who had so recently betrayed her? But as she looked at him, she saw a different man. She saw the man who had been humbled, the man who was finally seeing her for who she was. And she saw a flicker of the sharp, strategic mind that had, however, misguidedly gotten him to the top of his own field. Okay, she said, giving him a single decisive nod. Let's see what you can do. It was a fragile truce, a temporary alliance born of desperation. But in the dead of night, in the war room of her besieged company, it was a start. David, the disgraced husband, had just been given a chance to redeem himself. And as he picked up his phone, he knew he wasn't just fighting for her company. He was fighting for his marriage, for his family, and for the last tattered remnants of his own honor. The battle for Aura had just gained a new, unexpected soldier. While Isabella and her legal team prepared for an all-out war in the courtroom, David launched a covert operation from the confines of their home. He transformed from a moping unemployed husband into a man on a mission. He worked his phone like a weapon, calling in old markers, leveraging long-forgotten connections, and piecing together a mosaic of Liam O'Connell's less-than-stellar history. He discovered a pattern of behavior, a string of former partners and junior employees, mostly women, who had left Liam's companies under mysterious circumstances, many with non-disclosure agreements and quiet settlements. His key informant was a disgruntled former CFO of Innovatech, a man named Marcus Thorne, whom Liam had unceremoniously fired a year prior. Thorne, bitter and eager for revenge, was a treasure trove of information. "Liam's a narcissist," Thorne told David over an encrypted call. "He's brilliant, I'll give him that. But he's a black hole of credit. He sucks it all in, and no light escapes. He leaves a trail of bodies behind him. Check out a woman named Dr. Alana Finch. She was his lead researcher before Isabella. She left the country after working with him. Last I heard, she was teaching at a university in New Zealand." That was the lead David needed. He spent 2 days trying to track her down, finally finding an email address for a Dr. Alana Finch at the University of Auckland. He drafted a careful, respectful email explaining the situation and appealing to her sense of justice. He didn't know if she would reply, but it was a shot in the dark he had to take. Meanwhile, the pressure on Isabella was immense. Liam's injunction was granted temporarily, freezing Aura's operational accounts. The move was a strategic blow designed to cripple the company and sow panic among its employees and investors. The media circus was relentless. Liam was everywhere, the charming, wronged victim, while Isabella was portrayed as the cold, calculating ice queen. The climax arrived during a live, televised town hall event hosted by a major news network. It was billed as a debate, a chance for both sides to present their case to the public. Isabella, against the advice of her lawyers, had agreed to participate. "I'm not going to hide," she had told them. "I'm not going to let him control the narrative." The stage was set. Isabella sat on one side, poised and steely. Liam sat on the other, his expression a carefully calibrated mix of sadness and resolve. The moderator began, and for the first 30 minutes Liam was winning. He spoke eloquently of his vision, of his passion for the project, and of his devastation at being betrayed. He presented his cherry-picked evidence with the flair of a seasoned showman. Isabella's responses were technical, precise, and factual. She spoke of code architecture and development timelines. But in the arena of public opinion, facts were a poor match for a compelling emotional story. The live audience polls showed a clear swing in Liam's favor. David watched from the green room, his heart pounding. He had been feeding information to Isabella's PR team, but Liam was a formidable opponent. Just as he was starting to lose hope, his phone buzzed. It was an email. The sender was Alana Finch. The email was short, but it was explosive. "Mr. Chen," it read, "I will not be silenced any longer. Liam O'Connell is a fraud. He did to me exactly what he is doing to your wife. I am boarding a flight to Los Angeles now. I have a recording, and I have the original time-stamped server logs from our project. He didn't just steal my work. He tried to pass it off as his own to secure his first round of funding. I am sending the recording to you now." Attached was an audio file. David's hands trembled as he downloaded it. He quickly forwarded the email and the file to the lead producer of the town hall, a woman he had managed to connect with earlier, with a simple, urgent message: "You need to see this. A surprise witness is on her way. Play the tape." Back on stage, the moderator was moving in for the kill. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her tone sympathetic but firm. "Mr. O'Connell has presented a compelling case. He has emails, documents. What do you have other than your word?" Isabella opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, The moderator held up a hand. "We have just received some breaking information in this case. A new piece of evidence has just been submitted." A confused murmur went through the audience. Liam's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "We have an audio recording," the moderator announced. "Mr. O'Connell, perhaps you can shed some light on it." And then a voice filled the studio. It was Liam's voice, but it was not the calm, measured tone he had been using all evening. It was a voice from 5 years ago, dripping with venom and rage. "You think you can challenge me?" Liam's recorded voice sneered. The audio quality was slightly muffled, but the words were crystal clear. "You're nothing without me, Alana. You're just an emotional, hysterical woman. I will bury you. I will take your work. I'll put my name on it, and I will make sure everyone in this industry knows you're unstable." Who are they going to believe? Me, the golden boy? Or you, the hysterical woman who couldn't take the pressure? The silence in the studio was absolute. Every eye was on Liam. The color had drained from his face. The charismatic mask had shattered, revealing the ugly, snarling bully underneath. It was the exact same pattern of abuse, the same dismissive, misogynistic language he had used with Alana and that Isabella had described. The moderator's voice was icy. "Mr. O'Connell. That was your voice, was it not? And the woman you were speaking to? That was Dr. Alana Finch, your former lead researcher, was it not?" Liam was speechless. He looked like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Isabella looked directly at him, her expression not triumphant, but filled with a cold, righteous anger. "This is his pattern," she said, her voice ringing with clarity and power. "He finds talented women, exploits their work, and when they stand up for themselves, he tries to destroy them by calling them emotional or unstable. He didn't just steal from me. He has a history of it. The only difference is, this time he picked the wrong woman." The audience, which had been so sympathetic to Liam just moments before, erupted in a wave of applause. The spell was broken. The truth in all its ugly detail was out. In the green room, David watched, tears welling in his eyes. He had done it. He had given her the ammunition she needed. He had helped her win. On stage, Isabella Martinez was no longer on the defensive. She was in complete command. She had not only saved her company, she had exposed a predator and given a voice to his other victims. She was not just the CEO of Aura. She was a symbol of something far more powerful. She was a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed and betrayed, and had risen from the ashes stronger and more brilliant than ever before. The Queen had not been dethroned. She had just solidified her reign. The fallout from the town hall was immediate and spectacular. Liam O'Connell's career imploded overnight. His investors pulled out his board, resigned, and he became a pariah in the industry he had once dominated. Dr. Alana Finch, who arrived mid-scandal to a throng of reporters, became an overnight hero, and her testimony, along with the server logs she provided, sealed Liam's fate. The injunction on Aura's assets was lifted, and the lawsuit was dropped. The story of Liam's downfall and Isabella's triumph became a legend in the tech world, a cautionary tale about the perils of hubris and the power of truth. Aura's valuation skyrocketed, surpassing even the most optimistic projections. Isabella, now free from the cloud of suspicion, was hailed not just as a genius, but as a courageous leader who had faced down a powerful bully and won. She used her newfound platform to launch a foundation dedicated to supporting women in STEM, ensuring that others would not have to face the same barriers she had. But amidst the public victory, A private reckoning was still to come. Isabella and David returned home from the town hall in silence. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a quiet, contemplative exhaustion in its wake. The war was over, but the landscape of their marriage was still a battlefield. They put a sleeping hope to bed, their movements around each other, careful and deliberate. Then they sat opposite each other in the living room, the city lights twinkling below them. "Thank you," Isabella said, her voice soft but sincere. "I couldn't have done it without you. You saved me." David shook his head. "You saved yourself, Izzy. I opened a door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." He looked down at his hands. "I know this doesn't change anything. Not really. What I did, how I treated you, it's still there." "No, it doesn't erase it," she agreed. "But it does show me something. It shows me that you're capable of seeing me, truly seeing me. And it shows me that you're willing to fight for me, not just for yourself." She looked at him, her gaze clear and searching. "The man I married, the one who checked his emails while I was in labor, the one who dismissed my pain. I don't know if I can ever get back to him. I don't think I want to." David's heart sank. "I understand. But," she continued, a flicker of something new in her eyes, "the man who worked tirelessly to find Alana Finch, the man who used his skills to defend my honor, the man who put his own ego aside to help me, that's a man I could get to know. That's a man I could, potentially, build a new future with." It wasn't a promise of forgiveness. It wasn't a guarantee of reconciliation. But it was a possibility, a fragile, tentative opening. "Our old marriage is over, David," she said, the finality of it hanging in the air. "It was built on a flawed foundation, on secrets and disrespect. If we're going to have any chance, we have to tear it all down and start again. From scratch, with honesty, with respect, and with a clear understanding of who we both are." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. "I am the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I am a mother. I am a woman who will never again allow herself to be made small. Can you love that woman? Can you be a true partner to her?" David stood up and walked to stand beside her. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. He looked at her reflection in the glass, the powerful, brilliant and complex woman who was his wife, the woman he had almost lost. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion, but steady with a newfound certainty. "I can, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you if you'll let me." Isabella didn't reply immediately. She just continued to stare out at the city lights, a city of infinite possibilities. The future was unwritten. The trust was not yet rebuilt. The healing was far from complete. But for the first time since the cold, sterile moments of the delivery room, there was a glimmer of something that had been absent for far too long. There was hope. A new architecture for their lives was waiting to be designed, and this time they would build it together, brick by honest brick. So what do you think? Was David's betrayal unforgivable, or does his fight for redemption earn him a second chance? The story of Isabella and David is a raw look at what happens when the person you love most fails to see who you truly are. It's a reminder that sometimes our greatest challenges are not in the boardroom, but in our own homes. If this story of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, if it made you question, cheer, or even cry, then please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let us know in the comments below, Team Isabella or Team Second Chance. We can't wait to hear from you.